All right, let's actually enter a couple. Let's go to the first tab. We can find the bills in a couple different areas, but the easiest way to find them is in the plus button here. And we can go into the vendors and just open up a bill. So we're going to imagine that we received these bills from our vendor. Let's say it was Verizon. I'm just going to make a new vendor just so we can see how that might happen. So this is a new vendor. We're going to add it so I can add it on the fly, meaning as we go, adding it. So there it is. Notice if I add a vendor, we'll talk more about this later. You might want to enter all this information, but you don't really need to for a lot of vendors like the telephone company. I might not need a whole lot of detail. If they are a vendor that I buy inventory from, it's likely that I want more detail for my contact information. We'll talk more about adding vendors in the second half of the course, noting that if you're, I'm going to save this, working at a company or taking over the bookkeeping system, you shouldn't be adding too many vendors, because if the business has already been doing business, then the transactions should be somewhat cyclical. It's only when you do something new that you add a vendor. I'm adding a vendor here just so you can kind of see the process. Now the terms, you could put the terms, but they're not as relevant as on the invoice, because basically this is going to tell us when the due date is, meaning is it net 10, net 15 from the date we enter the bill. Now it's not going to be automatic is the problem with the bill, because it's going to be whatever the terms are from the invoice or the bill that we got from, like in this case, the telephone company. So we might have to actually enter the due date. So I'm going to say, so let's put it in the books at 1/1/2025, and let's say it's due on 01/15/25. I put 25, let's put 01/15 is what I said. All right, and then if there's a bill number, we can add the bill number. That helps just for reference sake. And then we have tags. We have a whole nother course or section on tags, which is a sorting kind of system that we can talk about at another time. Let's first not do an item, but rather do a category. And I'm going to put it into the category of telephone. Now, they might have it. So here we have telephone. It's a sub account of the utilities. All right, let's keep it there. We could put a description if we need to. We could say that the amount is going to be, let's say 75 again. Now this billable thing, this is only going to be there if you turn on the item to make it billable. Why would you make something billable? Well, if you're in a job cost system, then, for example, you might say, I'm using the telephone bill, or I might have supplies or something that I'm purchasing that I'm then going to add as part of my invoicing process when I invoice a customer. So if I have a job that I put together for a customer, I might then try to come up with the bill and say, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy the supplies. I'm going to pay what I need to pay for, and then I'm going to do a markup of 30% because that's how much I generate from the job, and that's how I'm going to make it as transparent as possible. So when I buy stuff for a particular job, I can then make it billable and assign a tax or not, and then assign it to a particular customer. Let's just make a new customer number 1. And I'll just generically put customer number 1 in here. I'm going to say save. Now you would only do this, again, if you're going to bill the customer. This bit over here isn't going to do anything for the financial statements that we're going to record, but it will then pull this information into the customer information so I can turn around and create an invoice. We'll talk more about that later. I just kind of want to touch on that right now. So that's basically it. So I have the option to print it, make reoccurring and so forth. Drop down here, I can save and new or save and close. Let's go ahead and save and close it. So we're going to save and close it. Then I can go into my balance sheet. I'm going to refresh it. I have to run it to get the numbers to be refreshed. And then I'm going to go down to the accounts payable. This time I'm going to click on the 2025 numbers because we entered this in 2025 to deconstruct what happened. There's our bill. It's in there as a bill type form. Verizon, accounts payable, telephone. This tells us the other account. There's always at least 2 accounts that are affected. in a double entry accounting system, as we saw in the Excel, there's the amount. I can click on any of these items, which will actually drill down to the source document, which is, of course, the bill. So here's our bill, and so that is great. All right, so let's close this back out, and let's go back to our report here. And then I'm going to go to the income statement or profit and loss from the tab to the right, run it to refresh it. Now here, because these are temporary accounts, it's all I'm going to see in 2025 because it's the only thing we've entered in 2025, making it a little bit easier. There it is under utilities, telephone, 75. It brought net income down just like we suspected it would. We're going to go into it, and then there's our bill once again, and the transaction detail. I can go into that, and that's going to give us our bill. So great. Going to close that back out, back to our report, and that's basically the transaction. Back to the balance sheet. We have the added problem on the balance sheet now of tying out to this number. I need the subledger to tie out to this number, breaking out the information by vendor so I can see who to pay. We'll talk more about this later, but let's just touch in on it now. If I go to the first tab, where can I find that information? It's in what I would call the vendor center or the expenses over here. And again, we'll get into this a little bit more possibly later, but you will recall we have the tabs up top. I could go into the expenses tab and sort and say I'm going to sort by my bills. And then here I have my bills. I could then further filter it for the last 12 months or just 2025. And I'm going to say, okay, there it is. And there's my Verizon bill right there. We can schedule a payment, mark as paid, copy it if we want, and so on and so forth. Most likely, we're going to just go to the bills tab up top, which is basically just designed specifically for the bills items, into the unpaid area. And then once again, I could sort this with the filters, and here we have it, and it's put the ones that are still due are up top, overdue items. There's my Verizon bill here. I can also look at it by vendors, and I could say, let's look at it by sorting by open bills. And then now this is going to give me all the vendors that have the open bill. And if I go into Verizon here, we can see all the activity in Verizon. There's our open bill. We could schedule a payment. So we'll schedule the payment. We'll get into more of that in the future presentation, but there is that. Now, I just want to point out that if I go to the bills over here, all of these bills should total up the 1677.67 to what's on the balance sheet at 1677.67. That's in essence our subledger. You can actually run a report for the subledger as well, but it's pretty neat that this totals it up for you right there. So that should tie out. The report, if I hit the hamburger and go into the reports on the left-hand side, there it is, Donde. And then I'm going to close up the ham boogie for now. And we're going to go into business over favorites, who owes you, sales and customers, what you owe. So you got the accounts payable aging, the accounts payable aging detail. Let's open up that one. Well, the most generic one will be bills applied, bills, the vendor balance. Let's just look at the vendor balance summary for now. Let's look at the detail. Sorry. Let's look at the vendor balance detail. This is like a classic subledger. So you probably don't use this one as much because you probably would use the aging one more or use the internal center over here. But just to see what a classic kind of subledger type report would look like. So we're going to do this. And so here is our subledger. And there's Verizon that has our bill in it. And again, this is just breaking out all of the ones that we owe. The point is that the total of the 1677.67 ties out to what is over here, 1677.67. The QuickBooks kind of forces that to happen because they don't let us enter anything into the system to accounts payable without a vendor, which kind of causes problems sometimes, but it keeps the subledger in balance, which is great. Other software might not do that. And if you encounter a subledger that doesn't tie out to the accounts payable, you have a problem, right? There's something that's been messed up, typically, is the thing. Okay, so let's go back to the first tab. just to note that that billable item would only be there if you had the bill items on, which is in the cog under accounting and settings, just to show you this. And then it's under expenses, and then it's under bills and expenses. And it's got this turned on to have billable items. This is not turned on by default. So the practice problem turned it on because it was a job cost system. So if I close this back out, we'll talk about more of that later. But just note, if I go into a bill, that is what this field is doing. That's where these two fields came from, the billable and tax item. And that basically means that if I went into customers on the sales side, and I went into, say, the customer, and then I'm gonna look for that customer that has the unbilled income. Let's sort by unbilled income, and there's customer number 1, which you can see has that $75 that we can pull over into an invoice, right? So we would use this to create an invoice from these billable items. So that's why that billable thing is there. We'll talk more about that later. I just want to point it out because it's part of the bill form. All right, so let's close this out. And do you want to leave without saving it? I do.